What happens the day after you get, like, everything you ever wanted? We always think the hardest part is winning, but surviving the win. That's where the real game actually begins.
Yeah, it really is. It's the part nobody prepares you for.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are exploring a really fascinating concept drawn from the mind key to the I Ching. Our mission here is to basically decode an ancient survival guide for sudden success.
Right, we're looking at this concept called Dayu, which translates roughly to great possessing or, massive abundance.
So we are talking about the exact psychological moment you land that startup IPO, or get a sudden massive promotion, or even just have a creative project go completely viral online.
Exactly. It's a critical pivot point that catches a surprising number of highly competent people completely off guard.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. But before we dive into the specifics of Dayu, it probably helps to understand the foundational philosophy. The I Ching is this 3,000-year-old framework originally used by leaders to navigate really complex, high-stakes situations.
And it communicates through these visual symbols called hexagrams, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at the visual imagery for Dayu, it is literally depicted as fire in the sky.
Fire in the sky. That is such a vivid image.
It really is. It's a combination of the sun, representing external prosperity and heat, positioned over heaven, which represents internal discipline and a solid structure.
So the underlying idea is that the external prosperity, the fire, has to be firmly rooted in a rigid internal order.
Precisely. Without that internal discipline, external abundance is just, well, it's an ungrounded wildfire. It burns out of control, causes chaos, and then completely fades into ash.
I love that visual, and it brings up a very specific feeling for me. It makes me think of walking in a desert at high noon.
Oh, yeah, where the sun is just beating down.
Right. The sun is directly overhead.
Yeah.
There are absolutely no shadows anywhere. Everything is completely exposed. Getting wealthy or stepping into a high visibility leadership role isn't this comfortable, warm glow that we tend to imagine when we're, grinding away at the bottom.
No, not at all. It's intense.
It's this crushing pressure. You have nowhere to hide. Suddenly, the entire rule book of your life shifts from how do I acquire resources to how do I not lose all of this and ruin my life in the process.
The environment fundamentally alters overnight, but human instincts usually lag years behind.
So how do we catch up?
Well, before tracking the chronological journey of how success actually unfolds, we need to establish the baseline rules of this new environment.
Okay, lay them out for us.
The philosophy lays out 3 core principles for handling sudden prosperity. And think of these not as like moral preaching, but as objective mechanical laws of physics for managing abundance.
Mechanics, not morality. I like that.
Exactly. So the first rule is to revere the possession. This means deeply recognizing that you are essentially just a temporary custodian of wealth or power, not its permanent owner.
Okay, let's unpack this because I really want to push back on that very first rule.
Go for it.
Acknowledging that you are just a temporary custodian of your success, doesn't that kind of steal the joy of earning it?
It can feel that way, yeah.
I mean, if someone grinds for 10 years, skips vacations, risks their life savings to build a business, telling them they are just temporarily holding on to the rewards feels incredibly dismissive of their actual grit. Western hustle culture explicitly teaches us to take fierce ownership of our wins.
That friction is incredibly common, especially when viewing this through the lens of modern business culture. However, claiming 100% personal credit is actually the first psychological domino to fall before a major collapse.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, the principle of the custodian isn't arguing that you didn't work incredibly hard. It's pointing out a mathematical reality. Your success also relied on timing, the broader economy, the unseen labor of people who supported you, and honestly, a healthy dose of sheer favorable circumstance.
Okay, fair point. It's
Yep.
never just one person in a vacuum.
Exactly. When you convince yourself that you alone are the sole architect of your abundance, a specific type of arrogance sets in. You stop listening to critical feedback because you believe your instincts are infallible.
So maintaining the mindset of a custodian keeps you anchored to reality.
It does. And more importantly, it maintains the consensus of the group around you. People will bend over backwards to support a grateful, grounded leader. Conversely, they will actively look for structural weaknesses to undermine an arrogant one.
That makes a lot of sense when you frame it as a survival mechanic. It shifts your mental energy from fiercely defending your ego to just pragmatically managing a resource.
Right, which frees up a lot of energy. And the second rule is to restrain desire. When you suddenly have infinite options, the noise is deafening. You have to build an active filter to focus strictly on your core values.
And the third?
The third is to release dividends. You have to share the wealth to build a defensive wall around your new position.
So let's look at how this plays out chronologically. The framework structures its advice through those hexagrams you mentioned, which are made of 6 stacked lines.
Right, and the bottom 3 lines form what's called the lower trigram. This represents your internal foundation and the initial surge of success.
And the very first stage of this journey is all about the shock of new resources, the overwhelming urge to splurge.
Yes. The philosophy describes this initial moment as a pure, almost unpolluted burst of energy, but one that introduces a deep, unsettling sense of unfamiliarity.
Because you suddenly have access to resources you've never had before.
Exactly. And the immediate psychological impulse for most people is to use those resources to just erase their past struggles.
It's the classic scenario of the newly funded tech founder.
Oh, perfect example.
Right. The ink is barely dry on their Series A funding. They haven't actually built a profitable product yet, and the very first thing they do is go out and lease a flashy sports car.
Yeah, to prove they made it.
They want to prove to the world, and honestly, probably to themselves, that they finally made it out of the trenches. But by doing that, they instantly attract grifters, yes men, and people who just want a piece of the new pie.
That trap is exactly what this foundational stage warns about. The ancient insight here translates beautifully to a simple phrase: remember the muddy road.
Remember the muddy road. That's good.
It advises keeping your hands clean and forcing yourself into a state of delayed gratification. When you try to wash away your past struggles with extravagant, visible displays of wealth, you sever your psychological connection to the very grit that made you successful in the first place.
So buying the watch or the car is the wrong move. What should they do instead?
The optimal move in this initial stage is actually to go visit an old friend who helped you when you were completely broke.
Oh, wow. That's super grounded.
It is. That specific action grounds your psychology. It reminds you of your true foundation before the intoxicating noise of success starts trying to redefine your entire identity.
But assuming you survive that initial urge to splurge, the reality of your new situation starts to set in. Because the next phase of this foundational journey is referred to as the heavy wagon.
Which sounds significantly less fun than buying a sports car.
Right. It sounds much more like a crushing physical burden. So say a listener just got a massive promotion, jumping from middle management to a director role with 50 people under them. How does that initial feeling of winning turn into hauling a wagon?
The shift is profound because wealth and status inevitably transform into physical and emotional responsibility.
You're suddenly carrying a lot more than just your own weight.
Exactly. The imagery of the large wagon is highly specific. When you get that promotion or when your startup suddenly has a real payroll to meet, you are no longer just carrying your own career ambitions.
You become the wagon itself.
You fundamentally transform into the load-bearing axle for an entire team or perhaps your whole extended family. The weight on your shoulders increases exponentially.
And if the axle breaks?
If your axle snaps because you make reckless, ego-driven decisions, the entire wagon tips over. Pretty much everyone riding in it falls, and their livelihoods are compromised.
It's that terrifying, sobering realization that your daily decisions now pay other people's mortgages. You can't just be scrappy and impulsive anymore.
The joy of individual, scrappy achievement has to be replaced by the serious gravity of structural maintenance. You can no longer operate on pure instinct, adrenaline, or late-night inspiration.
So what replaces the hustle?
To carry that heavy wagon safely over a long distance, you have to build structural rules. You have to establish brutally clear communication channels, delegate properly, and manage the load distribution so you don't burn out.
Which means you can't do it all yourself forever. Carrying that wagon naturally leads to a bottleneck, which brings us to the final stage of this foundational lower half, which is paying the toll.
Scaling up, entering a much bigger ecosystem.
Right. I visualize this like a fiercely independent local coffee roaster. They completely dominate their neighborhood. The community loves them. The margins are great.
A great place to be.
It is. But then they get the golden ticket. An opportunity to go national and get their beans into thousands of major supermarkets. Yeah. But to get on those shelves, they sit down in a corporate boardroom and realize they have to give up 30 or 40% of their profits to a massive distributor.
Which is a tough pill to swallow.
To a lot of passionate founders, signing that contract feels like a defeat. You're giving away a massive chunk of the pie you baked with your own hands.
Yeah.
But is it really a loss?
Within this philosophical framework, it is the exact opposite of a loss. It is the necessary price of evolution.
So it's a necessary sacrifice.
Yes. The philosophy refers to this agonizing moment as offering tribute to the Son of Heaven. It represents the critical pivot where you must voluntarily surrender a piece of your pie to buy a ticket to the next level of the game.
Because you can't grow in isolation.
Right. Whenever you reach a certain threshold of success, you will inevitably bump up against larger, infinitely more established systems and networks.
You essentially realize you can't just be a massive fish in a tiny pond forever. Eventually, you have to pay the toll to enter the ocean.
And there is a very specific warning here. The miser fails at this exact juncture.
Because they refuse to share the pie.
Exactly. If you try to hoard every single cent of your margins, or if you refuse to integrate with broader market rules out of pure stubborn pride, you become entirely isolated.
You keep all your pie, but the pie stops growing.
Yes. You might keep 100% of your pie, but your pie will struggle to grow beyond its current circumference. Relinquishing a degree of control or sacrificing a percentage of profit in exchange for access to a vastly larger network is a mature, necessary recognition of how massive systems operate.
Here's where this journey gets incredibly compelling to me. We've navigated the foundational stuff, we resisted buying the sports car, we built a sturdy wagon for our team, and we swallowed our pride and paid the toll to scale up.
Right, which moves us into the upper trigram.
The external world and the absolute peak of the mountain. And the very first stage of being at the peak is about hitting the brakes.
Which is fascinating.
It feels totally counterintuitive, almost offensive, to everything we are taught in modern business culture. Hustle culture dictates that if you are winning and have momentum, you press the accelerator to the floor, you crush your competitors, you scale infinitely.
That is the standard playbook, yes.
So why on earth would you intentionally hit the brakes when you are at the absolute peak of your power?
Because unbounded, aggressive expansion in a finite environment is essentially the biological definition of a tumor.
Whoa, that is a heavy way to put it.
The wisdom advises against being overly massive. Consider the psychology of the ecosystem around you. When you reach the absolute peak of industry influence or market share, continuing to aggressively expand doesn't just yield diminishing returns, it actively breeds intense paranoia among everyone else.
Because you're taking up too much room.
Exactly. If you occupy too much space and demand all the oxygen in the room, you become an existential threat to every other player in your ecosystem.
So if you keep trying to conquer every adjacent market, the rest of the industry will eventually form an alliance to take you down, simply out of self-preservation.
To take that a step further, they won't just try to take you down, they will feel morally justified in doing so.
So what is the right move then?
The smartest, most sophisticated strategic move at the absolute peak of success is actually to step back. You intentionally dim your own spotlight.
You deliberately make yourself smaller.
Yes. You actively push the credit onto your team, you allow your competitors some breathing room to survive, and you shift your entire focus from aggressive conquest to unshakable stability.
That is wild.
By consciously making yourself appear less massive and less hungry, you lower the threat detection shields of those around you. Ironically, giving up a little ground is what actually secures your position at the very top for the long term.
That is a masterclass in reading the room and understanding human psychology. Instead of flexing your muscles to intimidate people, you soften your posture. And that leads perfectly into the next phase of the peak, which is about becoming the transparent leader. But I have to challenge this one.
Okay, let's hear it.
The concept is about replacing the fear of losing your spot with radical transparency. Wait a minute. Open book management sounds great in an airport business book. But in reality, if everyone knows everything about how the company is doing and why every decision is made, doesn't that just invite middle management to second-guess you constantly?
It's a very common fear.
Isn't a little bit of mystique necessary to maintain authority?
It is a common fear, but mystique is often just a crutch for insecure leadership. True authority actually strips away the need for intimidation or secrecy.
Really? How so?
When a leader is fundamentally insecure in their position, they use mystery, unpredictability, and even fear to keep people off balance and reliant on them.
Basically keeping everyone guessing so the leader always holds the cards.
Right. But at the elevated level of Daedu, the absolute highest form of leadership relies on bright, open credit. Your power doesn't come from being feared or holding secret knowledge. It comes from being utterly, flawlessly predictable in your fairness.
Predictable promises. I like that framing. Yeah. It means if I do X, I know without a shadow of a doubt that my leader will do Y every single time, regardless of their mood.
The psychological safety that creates is immeasurable. You build a system that is so trustworthy and so transparently reliable that people feel a deep sense of security simply operating within it.
Because everyone knows exactly where they stand.
The rules are clear, the financial realities are known, the rewards are distributed fairly, and the leader doesn't rely on their title to get things done. They rely on moral and operational consistency.
That makes the whole system stronger, doesn't it?
It does. This kind of authority is incredibly resilient against mutiny because the people beneath it actively want to uphold the system. It serves their interests just as much as it serves the leaders.
Which brings us to the ultimate goal, the final line of the hexagram. The ancient philosophy calls this heavenly protection and the act of letting go.
The pinnacle.
When I hear that, I immediately picture the ultimate holy grail of modern entrepreneurship. The founder who can actually turn off their phone, go on a month-long vacation to an island, and know with absolute certainty that the company might actually run better without them hovering over everyone's shoulder.
That is the dream, isn't it? But the caveat here is vital. Heavenly protection in this philosophical context is absolutely not about luck, good karma, or, divine intervention suddenly dropping out of the sky to save you.
It's not just a lucky break.
No, it is the mathematical compounding result of making all the right difficult choices in the previous 5 stages we just discussed.
Putting in the actual work.
Yes, you remembered your muddy roots, you carried the heavy wagon of responsibility, you paid your dues to the larger system, you restrained your ego at the absolute peak, and you built a culture of transparent trust.
So you didn't just get lucky. You essentially coded good behavior and resilience into the actual DNA of the organization.
You have fully institutionalized your success. It is no longer reliant on your sheer, exhausting force of will or your daily micromanagement.
Your job description basically changes.
Completely. At this final stage, your identity and your role shift entirely. You transition from managing your ego and grinding through daily operations to simply stepping back and observing a healthy, self-correcting ecosystem run itself.
Because it doesn't need you to babysit it anymore.
Exactly. You have successfully created something that has its own life, its own momentum, and its own immune system.
What an incredible, grueling journey. When we step back and look at this entire roadmap of Day U, the big takeaway completely flips our usual script on its head.
It really challenges standard assumptions.
We are conditioned to think of abundance and success as a relentless process of addition. Adding more money to the bank account, adding more fame, adding more square footage to the house, more headcount to the team.
Constantly accumulating.
But surviving abundance, according to this ancient survival guide, is actually a rigorous exercise in division.
It is. If we look at the underlying mechanics, the math of long-term success is deeply counterintuitive.
Walk me through that math.
Well, you are constantly dividing your wealth to build alliances and pay tolls. You are systematically stripping away your own arrogance, and you are actively stepping out of the spotlight to divide the credit and the glory among your team.
It's the ultimate paradox. You have to do less and take less to maintain more.
It is the relentless discipline of restraint. And the truth is, whether you just got a $50 a week raise at a local hardware store or you just sold a tech company for $100 million, the psychological discipline required to not let that fire in the sky burn your life down remains exactly the same.
Because it's still just human nature.
The financial scale changes, but the human hardware processing the emotions does not. You have to establish rigid internal rules to safely handle massive external windfalls.
It really is all about building that solid, immovable base for the fire to rest on safely.
Absolutely.
So you've restrained your ego, you've shared the wealth, you've built a transparent system, and you've reached the absolute pinnacle of success. You are standing at the very top of the mountain.
The very peak.
But what happens when you are standing up there and you finally look down at the lowest, most overlooked patch of dirt beneath your feet? What secret is waiting for you down there in the mud? Ponder that, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.